Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're tackling a statement that's, well, it's designed to be provocative.
It really is.
The claim we're going to use as our tool for this deep dive is this: no male photographer is a good person.
And right away, that's a statement that makes you recoil, right? Which is exactly why we're using it. Our mission here is absolutely not to pass moral judgment on anyone.
No, not at all.
Instead, we're using that thesis as a sort of diagnostic instrument, a lever, really, to pry open these really complex, often contradictory relationships between gender, power, and the simple act of taking a picture.
And we've pulled together a huge stack of sources for this. We're drawing from critical race theory, visual culture studies, psychoanalysis, think Sontag, Barthes, Mulvey, Bell Hooks, Ariella Azoulay. We want to see what happens when you stop looking at the camera as just an art tool.
And start seeing it as a mechanism of power. But we have to set a ground rule first. This analysis is all about structural critique.
Right, the system, not the individual.
Exactly. We're looking at the historical systems that have, concentrated visual authority. And when we say male photographer, we're using that term broadly. It can mean cis men, trans men, anyone really who occupies that culturally masculine-coded position of mastery and control.
So this is not about whether your favorite photographer was a good guy. It's about the biases baked into the visual world itself. Okay, so let's get into it right at the beginning, the moment the shutter actually clicks.
And you have to start with Susan Sontag.
You do. She came right out and called the camera inherently aggressive, famously a sublimation of the gun.
Yeah, that phrase is so powerful. For Sontag, photography isn't passive. It's an act of extraction. It seizes something. It freezes a subject and turns them into an object you can possess.
An object you can look at whenever you want.
And that act of taking power becomes intensely charged when the person behind the camera already holds a privileged, masculine-coded position in society. The camera becomes a tool of conquest.
But then, almost immediately, you run into a huge theoretical wall, right? Roland Barthes and the death of the author.
The biggest wall. Because if you take Barthes seriously, the photographer's personal goodness, their intentions, they're completely irrelevant to what the image means out in the world.
So if a photographer felt nothing but empathy, but the picture ends up being used as a symbol of, say, objectification, whose meaning wins?
Barthes would say the meaning is born when you, the viewer, look at it, not when it was created. The focus shifts entirely to the image as a social object and specifically to its punctum.
And for anyone who needs a refresher, the punctum is that small detail in a photo that just, it pierces you, it wounds you emotionally, and it's almost never what the photographer intended.
Exactly. I mean, think of Richard Avedon's 1957 portrait of Marilyn Monroe. He took it after this long, exhausting photo shoot. She's just staring off camera, tired. All the Hollywood glamour is gone.
He looks almost defeated.
Utterly vulnerable. And Barthes would say that quiet, intense power comes from her vulnerability and how you read it. It has nothing to do with whether Avedon was a nice guy or not. The ethical weight isn't on his character. It's on the power dynamic of displaying that specific moment of exhaustion.
And then John Berger really cements that historical power dynamic with his famous line, "Men act and women appear."
Yes.
So when you apply that to photography,
Right.
The male photographer has historically been the authorized looker.
The authorized looker, that's perfect. He reproduces these cultural assumptions about who gets to look and who has to be available to be looked at. I mean, just look at the commercial work of Guy Borden in the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Highly stylized, but also deeply unsettling.
Right. The images are all about engineering the female body into this object that exists only to sell something or to anchor desire. The male gaze isn't just a look. It's institutionalized by the camera.
Which moves us from the cultural to the psychological. Laura Mulvey's theory of scopophilia, the pleasure of looking, is so key here.
It transfers perfectly from film to still photography. The camera isn't just recording reality, it's an apparatus that invites a certain kind of looking.
A voyeuristic looking. Objectification, fetishizing surfaces.
Yeah.
It aligns you, the viewer, with this default masculine position.
Right. Scopophilia is the engine that turns pleasure into power. You get gratification from controlling the image with your sight, and historically that's been structured through a masculine lens with the female body as the primary spectacle.
So take someone like Irving Penn. His fashion photography it's perfect. The lighting, the composition, it's also refined.
And Mulvey's analysis would show how that very aesthetic refinement can mask a deeply asymmetrical power dynamic.
Yeah.
The body is stylized, purified, all to maximize that scopophilic appeal. The beauty itself is ideological. It makes the structural violence of the gaze feel like art.
But that universal male gaze gets a lot more complicated when Bell Hooks introduces her idea of the oppositional gaze.
It gets so much more complicated. Because Hooks forces you to see that the gaze is never just about gender. It's also about race, about history, about who is structurally empowered to look.
So a white male photographer like, say, Steve McCurry, taking the famous Afghan girl portrait.
Is operating with a completely different kind of structural power than a non-white photographer would be.
That photo became a global icon, but the structural questions are huge. McCurry, as the Western professional, gets to define that girl for the entire world.
Exactly. The critique isn't about McCurry's compassion. It's about the entire structure of global media that gives the Western male gaze this immense power to define the other. Hooks makes you focus on subjects who look back with resistance, who challenge that authority.
And this all scales up even further with Dawn Haraway's critique of what she calls the God trick of seeing everything from nowhere.
The God trick, yeah. It's this fantasy of objective, all-seeing vision. The camera, especially in surveillance or military tech, often performs this kind of masculinity that's all about omniscience, detachment.
As if you can see without consequence or context.
But of course you can't. Your vision is always located somewhere. It's always shaped by power.
I think you see that so clearly in Trevor Paglen's work, where he photographs surveillance infrastructure, like secret military bases or drones in the sky.
Right. Even when the subject isn't a person, the gaze is instrumental. It's for governing, for classifying, for control. It's an extension of military and bureaucratic power, and it hides behind this mask of neutrality. The problem isn't just one guy with a camera, it's the whole system of seeing.
That structural logic becomes really stark and I think horrifying when you look at certain historical documents. Take Edward S. Curtis's project, The North American Indian.
Specifically, that iconic image, the vanishing race.
Right.
Curtis put in enormous effort, but the structural result, it was devastating. His photos are less a document of reality and more a staging of disappearance. He literally composed shots of indigenous riders receding into shadow.
He was materializing a colonial fantasy.
He was. The fantasy that these cultures were fading away and were, crucially, available for a white male authority figure to archive and salvage. He was performing what we'd call epistemic violence.
Explain that for us. What is epistemic violence in this context?
It's when you delegitimize a group's existence by imposing a dominant framework on them. Curtis wasn't just taking pictures. He was turning living, adapting cultures into static evidence for a colonial narrative that said they were doomed to vanish. His role as the archivist reinforced the very system that benefited from their disappearance.
And the ethics of war photography fall into a similar structural trap. Richard Drew's photo, Falling Man, from 9/11. It's just unbearable to look at.
It's unbearable because Drew, as the professional witness, is in a role that demands he turn this private moment of death into a public, consumable image. His professional distance, the need to stay calm and frame the shot, just amplifies the awful contradiction of documenting suffering. The cruelty is in the structure of the job, not necessarily in the man himself.
Which brings us to the ultimate case of moral outrage. Kevin Carter's 1993 photo, The Vulture and the Little Girl.
The backlash was immediate and intense. Why didn't he help? Everyone focused on his personal goodness or lack of it.
But thinkers like Ariel Azoulay would say that outrage is totally misplaced.
Completely. Azoulay's idea of a civil contract of photography shifts the blame. The real problem is the entire visual economy, the media, the global audience, that demands and rewards these images of distant suffering. Focusing on Carter lets the whole violence system off the hook, including us, the viewers.
This is a perfect point to bring in a counterexample that really refines the thesis. Dorothea Lange's migrant mother. Lange was a woman.
And this is the moment you realize the critique isn't actually about the photographer's identity, but about the function of the camera.
Right.
Lange had empathy. No one doubts that. She wanted to create change, but even her compassion couldn't save her from the structural asymmetry of the situation. She still transformed a vulnerable person, Florence Owens Thompson, into a piece of public iconography.
So even though Lange felt compassion, the act itself was still one of extraction, taking someone's private struggle and making it a public symbol.
Precisely. Her gender didn't change the fact that she held the structural authority as the photographer. She framed it, she titled it, she put it into circulation. It shows that documentary authority is systemic. The camera, in that context, was a tool of extraction, no matter whose hand it was in.
That is a really powerful point. The issue is embedded in the medium. So what about a genre that's all about intimacy, like personal portraits?
Well, look at the work of Nobuyoshi Araki. His series Sentimental Journey documents his life with his wife Yoko from their marriage all the way through her illness and death. It's incredibly raw and loving.
Uh, he's the author. He's the one deciding which moments of her life, her grief, her body are shown to the world.
That's the tension. Love and authorship get tangled up, but the structural power remains with him. He holds the power to archive her, to turn their shared life into his singular vision. The issue isn't malice, it's the structure that allows one person to have that kind of representational control over another.
Okay, so if we pull back, the thesis, no male photographer is a good person, was never really a verdict on men at all.
Not at all. It's a statement that goodness is almost impossible to locate in a medium that is built on capture, on a kind of structural violence. The thesis is really an attack on masculinity as a visual regime, an infrastructure built on mastery, control, and conquest.
And you see that infrastructure everywhere. Male photographers historically dominated genres like war, street, and erotic photography. And the gatekeepers, the editors, the museums, the military contracts, that whole architecture has been overwhelmingly masculinized.
It defined what was even considered an important photograph for decades.
So what about the exceptions? Women like Diane Arbus or Nan Goldin, who use confrontational, sometimes voyeuristic techniques. Doesn't that challenge the gendered argument?
I think it refines it, actually. It proves the point perfectly. It shows that voyeurism and extraction aren't essentially male traits, they are techniques. They are part of the camera's powerful grammar of looking, available to anyone who picks it up. Arbus and Golden step into that existing power structure. It proves the gaze itself is the engine.
And now, today, that structural power seems to have outgrown the individual photographer completely.
Yeah.
You have artists like Hito Style, whose work is all about how the gaze is now infrastructural.
It's embedded in algorithms, in automated networks. Style's work shows you that the system is watching whether a person is there or not. Surveillance is automated. Algorithms decide who is visible and who is a target. The problem is so much bigger than the moral character of one person with a camera.
So this whole deep dive really reveals that we have to shift our focus. We have to stop judging the souls of photographers and start scrutinizing the systems that allow for the capture and circulation of images in the first place.
The provocative thesis did its job. It was an accusation against the historical system that made men the default authors of vision. The real conclusion is that photography is just. It's a site of ethical entanglement. No one can fully escape the contradictions of representation.
Which leaves us, the audience, with the most critical question. If the violence of the gaze has outgrown the photographer, if it's now automated in AI and surveillance, what do we do? How can we, as spectators, practice ethical spectatorship?
That's the question. How do you resist the commodification of suffering when it's all around you? The solution has to be systemic. We have to push for collaborative authorship, for decolonial practices where subjects control their own image, for radical transparency.
So the work really begins not with judging the photographer, but with asking yourself what your responsibility is, just in the act of looking. That's the real next step beyond moral judgment.